What's going on, everybody, and welcome to episode 11 of Tall Boys
and Track Masters.
So normally we begin this program with me asking Trevor how his weekend was, and I think I kind of know how your weekend was because we actually got to go ride together Sunday.
It was great, let me tell you.
Yeah.
So
good time.
New nickname, courtesy of your father, Aquaman. We will touch on the reasons behind that later in the episode.
Yep.
It's not necessarily a nickname you want to end up with, but it is what it is.
I'll tell you, man, that was definitely one to remember.
Oh, yeah. Good stories. Is fantastic.
Yep. Yeah, good group of guys, and it definitely turned out to be a really awesome day. So, with that in mind, we're kind of looking for ideas to do for the show tonight, and we wanted to kind of diagnose the anatomy of a dual sport ride. What all goes into putting one together, be it, kind of a fly by the seat of your pants type of deal, or do you do like me where you're kind of ADHD anal about things and want details and what all goes into putting that together. And I think it'll make for a good topic for tonight's episode and something that people can look at and think about. So yeah, man, we'll just jump right into it. And obviously I think the first aspect of any type of dual sport ride is the planning process. What goes into what you want to do? There's all kinds of different factors that kind of dictate what you want to do for that day or that weekend or however long you're going to do that ride for. So yeah, we kind of talk about the planning stages of it a little bit. So I know for me, my life is kind of hectic with my job, my responsibilities, my children, and I need everything kind of clear cut and on a schedule. And I know that might not be fun to some people, but to me, I still enjoy it. I still have a good time. So yeah, I'm of the mindset where I
one day a month to go ride. You got to make it count.
Yeah,
you got to do what you can to make sure that you're going to get your money's worth, so to speak, out of that one day, or 2 days a month or whatever you actually get out and go.
Yep. Yeah, I'm the type of guy that wants to know what time are we meeting, who all's coming, where are we going? Like I want all that stuff figured out before I ever even put my gear on to head out the door.
Yep, I agree.
Now sometimes that can, take away from the ride a little bit, but like I said, I've got too many things going on and I have a deadline, so to speak, where I need to be back at a certain time or know that I need to start heading home once it starts getting a certain point in the day. So
yeah, I sometimes I have to be careful who I ride with, especially on a Sunday, because, I work day shift, but I still get up pretty early to go to work and everything. And, you got to watch who you ride with, because somebody might decide they want to go to Wetzel County and put in a 300-mile loop that day. And you don't know until it's too late. And, it's 6 o'clock and you're still 3 hours from home.
Yeah.
That's, it's not ideal. It does add to the sense of adventure, but,
Yeah. I've definitely been on rides like that, like I know a few years back, our buddy Brian Holmes, who we had on the program doing our interview there a few episodes back, he's got a route laid out that starts in St. Mary's and works its way almost all the way over towards 5 Points and comes back. And it's called the Death by Dual Sport route. And I've never rode with those guys before, but talked to them a good bit and seemed like a good group of guys. And he's like, hey, this is going to be I think it's like 160 miles or something. So I'm like, that's a solid day. That's a solid day of riding. And, you really don't think about it, but, I had to get to St. Mary's, unload the bike, ride, come back home. I'm still almost 2 hours from the house. And they did it on a Wednesday during the week. So I had to work double to get that.
I pretty much just said there is no way that I can swing it.
Yeah. So I ended up working a double in order to get that day off, and my double came the day after the ride, and I had to work 16 hours on Thursday to make up for that Wednesday that I was off.
Yeah.
So, you couple that with a 2-hour drive home at the end of a hard day of riding, plus, the twin boys weren't very old, and the wife had enough of their shenanigans during the day. So as soon as I walk in the door, I get handed both of them. and that's responsibilities. And I took care of them all night long, and then had to work a 16-hour shift. So yeah, sometimes you got to pre-plan things like that to get around your responsibilities a little bit.
Yep. And trying to be conscious too. If you know that you ride with somebody like James that has a pretty tight schedule and everything, just do him a favor and try to communicate to him what you think you're going to be getting into and the potential implications of not getting back till way late in the day or what have you.
Yeah.
So like I said, there's sometimes I really don't feel like doing a 200-mile day. Sometimes I would just want to go run some local stuff and be done with it by like 3:00 and something to do in the afternoon or whatever. You just kind of tailor it based on what you feel like doing that day.
Yeah. I think it also is a big factor if, like, kind of like we did on Sunday, where it was a new destination that we wanted to go check out. I think that if you have that to deal with, it really does dictate a lot of planning.
Yep.
Because if you're just going to do some local stuff, you've done it a million times, you know what to expect. But going in blind to a new situation like that definitely requires at least some type of planning.
Yeah, the local stuff, pros, it's the same 5 trails you've ran, 20 times a year for the last however many years. Cons, it's the same 5 trails you've ran 20 times a year for the last however many years, unless you've gotten like some down trees or some heavy rainstorms that's rutted things out and changed the terrain a little bit. It does get old if you do it, really often.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, really, in our area, the terrain does seem to change a lot, know. You take like the backside of Valley Falls, for instance, where you went through there, that big ass boulder had fell off the side of the hillside. It kind of changed how you had to go around.
That was really interesting.
Yeah,
which they have moved now. You can get a pickup truck around it. I'm at Tacoma through there Saturday, I think. So
yeah, and when we come through on Sunday, that guy was in that Wrangler, so you can definitely get around there now. But
absolutely,
yeah, like you said, trees down. High rains kind of changing the direction of creek flows, because I know we go through a lot of creeks and stuff. It'll kind of change stuff up. So
that you can always count on our good friends on Side by Sides to artificially change the terrain almost every weekend through some of that stuff.
Yeah, beer cans for traction.
Yeah, beer cans for traction, and that little puddle that was 6 inches deep 2 weekends ago is now like 3 feet because somebody on 38's boarded out.
Yeah, it's definitely something you got to look for, man. That's another thing. Going in blind to a new area, and it was definitely true on the Kingsville Road we were on. Yeah. Some of those water holes, they look just like a lake, and you get through it, and it's a solid bottom
through there because it's an old railroad grade, so they mostly cut it through any sections of mountainside, so you just end up with 2 near vertical sides, and then you have spots where water collects, and you genuinely cannot get around them in some cases. And that kind of, I don't know, I don't want to go do it again because I had a pretty bad experience with it.
Yeah, it's deceptive because, like you said, you go through a few of those water holes, and there's a solid bottom to it, and it's not really that deep. Then you get to the next one, and it's the same way. So you do like 3 of those in a row, and you're like, oh, okay, this isn't that bad. And then the last one you get to, it's a sand bottom. It's completely wallered out, and it's way deeper than anything else we've been on. So
my biggest concern with water crossings, especially anything I can't see the bottom out of, is hitting somebody's rut. And that was my case even when I was, jeeping pretty regularly. I was running 33s. Falling off into a rut made by a guy with huge tires was awful. And it's even worse on a bike because you can go from, relatively level underlayment that's, whatever substrate's under that mud puddle to something that's another 2 feet deep, like just like that.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, we, like take this ride, for example. I just had a destination in mind, someplace I'd never been that I wanted to go.
Yeah.
So what did I do? I figured out all the guys that I wanted to bring on the ride, or ask the guys that I thought might want to go. And that's another one of our bullet points is who are you bringing with you? And I think that sometimes dictates very heavily about what type of ride you can do.
Agreed.
if you've got a bunch of like-minded guys on with similar skill levels and you know what kind of terrain that they like to usually ride, then you can kind of plan accordingly. But if you've got some people with you that maybe are on some bigger adventure bikes or something that you know is going to struggle in some tight stuff, you got to tailor that to them, or even to a point where you can have a place where maybe that group of people can split off and meet you back onto another section of road.
I agree.
And you know, that's a big deal because, like I said, that dictates a lot of what you can do.
Yep, I agree. Another thing too is, you know, just because like some of us were kind of like a glutton for punishment, the worse the terrain sucks, the more fun we're having, kind of deal. There's people out there that just aren't like that.
Yeah.
They just want to go out for a Sunday cruise or what have you and see some scenic routes and hit a little gravel. So, you know, communicating what kind of terrain you're planning on hitting, etc., and maybe suggesting that, you know, you might want to sit this one out or find another group to ride with that's going to do like a more ADV style route, because like you said, this is going to consist of like tight trails, more challenging terrain, etc.
Yeah,
it does suck to get somebody out there that's in way over their head, and you know,
well, it's bad for everybody. You know, that person's obviously not having a good time.
Yep.
Everybody that's out there trying to help them's probably not having the greatest time, having to wait on somebody the whole time, and you know,
which
that's
I'm fine to do. But you know, when it gets to the point that you're spending most of your time out there trying to, well, like you and Fred having to muscle that guy's versus,
I was just about to
around. It's
man,
okay for a little bit, and then it goes from being glad that you can lend a hand to you know, wishing it was over.
Yeah, it's definitely a double-edged sword, because I always like to see new guys come out with us and ride, and new guys join the group, and you know, a lot of times our local stuff that we do all the time gets boring to us, but if you can see it through the eyes of a new guy that's never seen anything like that before, and they get through it pretty decent, that really kind of reinvigorates it for me, so to speak. You know,
it's all about building confidence, and the only way that you're going to do it is by challenging yourself. And that doesn't mean being so far beyond your skill level and comfort zone that you're risking, you know, injury and damage to your bike. But you know, trying to get a little bit more competent on, say, loose creek beds, or a little bit better on hill climbs. But not like immediately shooting for like Big Agnes on 5 points and hoping for the best, kind of.
Yeah, you don't want to take somebody, you know, on a ride and then you're going by Hatfield McCoy trails and, hey, we're going to go to this double black diamond with the guy that's on the Tenere 700. Like, you don't want to do that.
Yep.
And like you mentioned there, when me and Fred went down and did the Shenandoah 500 in 2019, we were going along, and you know, it's a great ride, and I recommend everybody tries it at least once. But we're going down through all these you know, forest fire roads, and it's a good time. It's fun. It's not that challenging. There's a few little spots, a few little creek crossings, nothing major, and you know, we're still having a good time. And there was 2 AA sections that you could do on that route, and it ramped the difficulty up. So the first one was definitely hard, Union Springs Road that takes you up towards Reddish Knob down there in Virginia in the George Washington National Forest. And then the second one was the Rocky Run ATV Trail, which to date is one of the hardest trails that I've ever done on a dual sport motorcycle. So me and Fred are going along, and we get behind this guy on a V-Strom 650, and he's keeping right up with us, no issues, no problems, and I think he's a pretty good rider, you know. So we get up to the entrance to the Rocky Run ATV Trail, and the guy's like, "Is this the AA option?" I said, "Yeah, it is." He's like, "Have you ever done it before?" "Nope, I can't, man. I don't know anything about it." He's like, "Well, I'd like to try if you guys wouldn't mind sticking with me in case I have some issues." And I'm like, "Well, you know, this guy's riding pretty decent. He really hasn't had any issues. So yeah, man, we'll stick with you." And here you go. You're going down through there, and it's literally a goat path through a bunch of rocks and rock boulders and switchback hill climbs. And it ended up taking me, who else was it? Chris Alls and Fred and Spencer Taylor basically pushing this guy's V-Strom around that 7.5 mile loop, and just absolutely ruined the day for us.
Yeah.
Yeah. You gotta watch and kind of cater your ride to your riders.
Yeah, I agree. So you talked about setting a destination. That's one of my favorite things to do is just to hop on Google Earth, Google Maps, look at some aerial imagery, try to find something that looks weird. Like if you can find something that looks like old ruins or something
Yeah.
like that, or I know there's a repeater tower for a satellite array that I'd really like to go check out. I don't remember what county it's in. I think it's over towards Taylor, but
Mhm.
stuff like that. And I just like trying to go find weird, uh, like geographical spots that look difficult to get to, but look reasonable to get to.
Yeah.
There's a series of service roads, whatever, that you can use to get to it. Either that or kind of the other side of the coin is planning your route around, like you want to ride a specific terrain. Like there's a specific trail or something that you really want to go through. I know, before they closed that bridge down, running up to Sand Springs to get
Yeah. Rockville.
different different terrain under your tires. We do
Yeah.
that relatively often, right
Yeah.
out the Blue Hole. So
Yeah. That's probably the biggest thing about doing a dual sport ride, I think, is the route. I mean,
yeah,
it's what you have to really consider, the most important thing, I really think. And like you said, if you have a destination in mind, how are you going to get there? And I think that may kind of go back to your riders too. If you have a bunch of adventure guys, obviously they're not going to want to do a bunch of single track to get down that way. So you need to tailor it to them. But I'm of the mindset where I want to try to do as little slab as possible.
yeah, me too.
And unfortunately, in our area, there's places where it's just unavoidable. You have to do, an 8-mile slab section to get to where you want to go.
Yeah,
And especially if it's a
got to
new,
get on 33 for a cent.
yeah, we did. Yeah.
That's happening.
But yeah, like you said, especially our ride was a prime example. I knew that Kingsville Tunnel was down there, never been there, wanted to go to it. It's a destination. It's kind of neat. You get to ride through an old train tunnel under the mountain.
Yeah.
And, kind of had a set route in mind of how we kind of wanted to go down that way. And we ended up going through the backside of Valley Falls and then down into Arden and working our way. We ended up doing an 8-mile stretch at Route 250 to go from Philippi to Belington.
But we did find a way to get between Philippi and Belington. Well,
yeah, on the way back.
Between Belington and like Teeter Creek area.
Yep.
That was actually a fun little.
Yeah, it was. And another thing too, listening to the riders that are with you. If you have a set route in your head of where you want to go, you know what route you want to do. But this guy that's with you talks about this road that kind of cuts that section off. It's definitely worth listening to. Like, for example, you had all that stuff that go up towards Teeter Creek that cut off all the 8-mile slab that we had to do. And then
it helps to have somebody that's like local to the area that you're going to get. Like I grew up in Elkins, so that's kind of just second nature, all the stuff kind of in and around that area.
Yeah. Yeah. And even like, my dad was with us and asked if we'd ever been across Shelby Road, which cut off, all of Prunty Town and the intersection down towards the Ann Jarvis house. And yeah, it was asphalt, but it was cool asphalt and cut off a good section there. So that was a nice road to find too.
Yeah, I agree. If you got to hit slab, I am a fan of trying to hit slab that's got twists, turns, winds in it, because it is just outright boring. Having one of those thumpers sing along at 60 miles an hour on an almost straight stretch for 10 minutes.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, that one section of 250 we did.
Nothing we can do to avoid it, but that kind of brings me to something I wanted to talk about. Is it genuinely does not matter how well you try to plan your route. If you are looking into trails, roads, etc., that you've never been on, do not trust Google. Do not trust the WVDOH's website. Do not trust tax parcel stuff from mapwestvirginia.gov.
Yeah.
Because we encountered several roads that were gated up and looked like hadn't been touched in decades.
Yeah.
There is no indication on any map that would tell you otherwise.
Yeah. There's a lot of different mapping software out there, like Onyx and Geocache and a bunch of different
GPS. And I've had some great success with it.
Yeah. The one unfortunate thing I think about those apps is it's more tailored for West Coast stuff. Like there's a lot of stuff that's mapped out very well on the West Coast, but East Coast, there's really not a whole lot of kind of updated and good maps. And like you said, the DOH maps that we have out are, let's just face it, terrible. I'm the district representative for Marion County in the Country Roads Coalition, and I have to deal with this stuff all the time. You have a guy come up to you and say, hey, I followed this road and it's an illegal gate that's put up and it connects over here to this side. And according to the county road map, it's still a county road.
Yep.
And I'll go through the SWAT system and everything on the DOH website to submit those gates. And the DOH doesn't want to deal with, the 40-year-old farmer that's had that gate up for that many years and doesn't want people going through there. So they don't do anything about it. They just update the county road map to show it not connecting to the other side again. And they just don't have to deal with anything, it's unfortunate, but that's what happens in our area.
I agree.
Yeah. Yeah. The route, like you said, man, it's a huge deal. And
having a plan B, what other letters of the alphabet that you can manage, it doesn't hurt to have, several other potential routes in place where you can have them. There's some areas where, it's one and done. There's some areas that there is one single path through, and it's a lot easier to utilize the tools that you have in terms of aerial mapping, etc., to try to pre-plan as best you can rather than getting into an area where there is no service. And then discovering you can't get through the way that you'd planned to, and then you're scrambling to try to figure out what series of side roads and connectors and all that stuff are going to get you where you're trying to go.
Yep. All best laid plans are subject to failure. And
it's true.
Yeah, you definitely have to have some backup ideas on stuff. And, like you said, I'm a big fan. I've got a decent amount of free time on my hands a good bit of the time. So I'm constantly on Google Earth and my Ride GPS app and different apps, just kind of doing an aerial scout of maybe, hey, where's this road go? Can we connect this to something else that we do? And my hats are off. My hat is
this group page and
put
up a question and ask like, hey, are there guys that ride this section of Wallace? Is this trail passable?
Right.
Do you guys have any tips or tricks to get from point A to point B through this area?
Yep. Yeah, and that's why I really liked when new people come ride with us, and maybe they didn't know that road even existed and can connect to stuff that they know about that you don't know about, and it's always nice to share that information between people and just help everybody out. And I'm not a fan of what they call gatekeeping.
Sure.
Not letting people come just because of a cool road that you don't want to share with anybody else. Now to that extent, like when we do the 304 detour, charging to do our ride, we have multiple sections of private property, which, that's a different story. These are all county roads and stuff that we're riding. So
also, simply put, it's work.
Yeah.
I mean, I see what amount of work gets put in from everybody's end. You're paying for fuel in your bike to go pre-route. You're paying for the arrows, the venue, and you have to put some level of value on your time spent planning. And it is not as simple, and you can attest to it, as picking point A, point B, and we'll just figure out a loop for this.
Yeah.
There's some serious considerations that have to be put in.
Yeah. I really don't think people realize all the work that goes into like a big event style paid ride. Like you said, there's supply costs, there's your time. Your time is the biggest thing. Pre-running something.
You would shudder to actually sit down and calculate your hours versus what you actually got. It would be, absolute minuscule payment. It's done because it's more or less a labor of love for everybody.
Yeah, I'm not about it for the money. The money's nice to recoup some stuff that you may have invested into it, but it's like I said, and that even goes to guys like Brian and Laney Hoosier from Adventure Horizons who go out and pre-scout and find these awesome loops and lay them out and then add the maps online for free that anybody can go and do. I mean, that's a huge labor of love.
Guys like that are an absolutely massive resource
Oh yeah.
to the hobby.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
kind of back on topic about route planning. So we touched on, or sorry, ride planning. So we touched on the routing, having a general idea where you're going to go, backup routes, etc. The guys you're going to go with, knowing kind of the terrain they're comfortable with, how their bikes are set up. So what are we on to from there?
You know, one thing that can make or break your ride even before you begin, I think, is any type of pre-maintenance. You know, just going over the thing with a fine tooth comb for an hour to make sure that nothing's going to, you know, completely derail your ride before you even start. I guess something kind of overlooked.
Yep, I agree. Chain tension, huge. Is there air in your tires? Did you pick up a nail the last time you went out on the road?
Yeah. What kind of little, maybe, you know, routine maintenance things have you been neglecting that may turn into something big and completely just, you know, stop your ride cold in its tracks? I mean,
do you have a wheel bearing and it's about to split into multiple pieces? It's
yeah. Yeah, you don't want to be that guy.
No.
I've been that guy, you know, and you don't want to be the guy that's holding up the whole ride because, you know, you failed to take 10 minutes to do something that's going to, you know, not fly off the bike. But,
and, you know, this isn't to say that unforeseen things aren't going to happen. They
right.
will absolutely happen when you least expect them.
Yep.
And it's a completely different story than something that someone knew. Like you had a chain that, you know, had a ton of kinks in it and sprockets that had fewer teeth than the you know, corn dog line at the Forest Festival. And you know, you said you're going to get another rod out of them, and then next thing you know, you're bogged up on the side of the trail because your chain keeps derailing because again, you've neglected it. So
yeah,
and, it sucks too because especially if you have the time to do it and you just decide not to.
Yeah.
You know, you get out 1-2 couple weekends a month. You don't want to spend that time that you could spend riding, sitting and maintaining your bike. That's what weeknights are for.
Yep. Yeah, you're absolutely right, man. An ounce of prevention goes a long way. And, you know, it, like you said, there's always going to be times where something just, you know, completely out of the blue will happen. And there was no way to prepare for it, no way to prevent it. And you just have to try to work through it. And, you know, that kind of also ties back into, you know, you're planning the ride. You need to try to plan for failures like that as well. I know that's a big deal for my dad and Tom King whenever they go to plan out the Easy Loop. They'll find out their route, figure out what they want to do, go do the ride, and then see how long it takes them to get back with, you know, not stopping or not doing anything else. And then you have to plan accordingly for your stops and then potential breakdowns. And if you can get back at a decent time where you still have a couple hours to spare before it gets really dark outside, then you know you got a good route set up.
Yeah, definitely pad your time, you know, where you can. Worst case scenario, you end up having a, you know, a great day and nothing happens and you can just either end up home a little early or go out and ride a little more. It's up to you at that point. But yeah, so kind of talking about the unforeseen, etc. We had a pretty good little episode regarding tools and trying to plan for, you know, realistic failures that you're going to experience. So one I want to add to that, don't know that we necessarily touched on, was if you do water crossings, and it can even be just 6 inches of water across a creek if you drop your bike in it and swamp it, especially, you know, suck some water up in the engine or the exhaust. You need to have the tools with you to get your spark plug out of your bike. That includes whatever is required to get your tank off of your bike to access it if, you know, the tank blocks it. So what happened to me on Sunday was one of these unavoidable mud holes. I wasn't the first through, and, you know, looking back on it, there's things I could have done different that probably would have not ended where I ended up. My problem is I lost momentum going forward. And if you've ever went through water on a bike, you kind of push like a bow wave in front of you, like your skid plate and your engine and everything. That actually will serve to keep water away from your airbox. My problem is I came to a stop and that water that was being carried forward by my bike came forward, and there is a thumb hole size drain right in front of the mud guard on the KTM's, rear subframe, and water just right up in there, right into the air filter, choked my bike out. I had the sense to not start it, and I suggest that anybody that is in that scenario do what I did, especially if it chokes and kills itself, is just pop it neutral and get your feet wet. Just deal with it. I had water coming up over top my boots. It felt like I had to push that thing for a ridiculous distance to get it out of there. So from there, getting the tank off, getting the spark plug out, and that's something that if you're planning on riding, creek, mud hole, anything like that, you need to familiarize yourself with what you need to do to actually get that out. I had the spark plug tool with me, laid it down, forgot about it. And then, in the anxiety of thinking, I just destroyed my bike, couldn't find it. Luckily, AJ had one, came to the rescue on that. And while mine was laying under my jacket on the side of the trail, but, got the spark plug out and turned the motor over. And it shot about, bottle cap or two full of water out of the cylinder. So, trying to start it when it's got water in the cylinder, can hydrolock it. You can bend your conrod, your valves, etc. I've been through it with Jeeps in the past. That's why I kind of knew what to do. We sunk my buddy's Cherokee one time in Helvetia and got it out, pulled the plugs, and shot water out of 2 cylinders. But it's just extremely stressful to go through something like that, thinking you just destroyed your bike. I completely lucked out, did not get water intrusion in the oil. Of course, it did make its way into the engine, but getting that water out of there with spark plug, fired right up, sounded fine, no milky oil. As soon as I got home in the evening, I dropped the oil out of it. Again, not milky. I even went as far as to cut the oil filter apart to check the filter media to see if there was any signs of, metal flake from increased bearing wear or whatever from, getting water in the oil and everything. So I definitely got lucky. I'm going to be a lot more reluctant in the future to try to tread water where possible. But that's really something that was the last thing that I thought would happen. Coincidentally, it was one of my greatest fears for riding, was that happening. So now that it's out of the way, it's honestly kind of liberating. So that's how I ended up getting the nickname Aquaman from James's dad. So lesson learned is carry more momentum going through some of that stuff. But other than that, I don't know that I've done anything differently. The process that I went through definitely saved that bike, in my opinion.
Yeah, the Austrians made some pretty decent U-boats back in World War II, but nowadays it's not really the same. With
my career in the FDSR Naval Division is not looking very promising.
You definitely made the right call. I don't think people realize that if water gets into a cylinder like that, it doesn't compress.
Yep.
It just bends things.
So you can get by, like if you've got a bike that's kickstart. Unless you're an absolute He-Man, chances of you bending the conrod by just trying to slowly kick it over to gauge whether or not there is any amount of water in the cylinder, it's probably not going to do anything. But electric start, does that starter actually have enough oomph to, bend that connecting rod? I'm not going to find out.
Yeah.
Because, even a cheap rebuild is, more money than I even want to consider. But
you made the right call, and like you said, it didn't take that long to take the tank off, take this plug off.
And don't be
25 minutes maybe.
Don't feel bad about in that scenario. Don't feel bad about like holding guys up, because that's it has the potential to be catastrophic, a complete day ender, season ender. Even rebuilds are very expensive, and I was really fortunate. And, it really didn't take that much time. It helps a lot having guys that wrench on their own bikes, especially having guys that wrench on their own KTMs, because, you've got more helping hands than you can shake a stick at.
Yeah.
And, everyone's got a pretty good idea. It's difficult to stay level-headed through stuff like that, but once you're there, it's already happened. There's nothing that you can do to go back in time and fix it. The only thing you can do is try to fix the situation as you're currently experiencing it. So I think we proceeded to do 100 miles or something like that after that. So I did not let it ruin my day. Everything ran fine. Oil looked great. Got the water out of there. Because normally, if you swamp one and bend something, or it sucks like a bunch of grit in the motor, it is not going to take long at 8,000 RPM before some significant issues start to show themselves.
Yeah,
and especially dropping the oil out of that thing as soon as I got home, even though I didn't see any evidence of water intrusion. And if you're paranoid like me, even cutting open the filter media and doing your little detective work or whatever, it's definitely worth it. But that kind of brings us into like post-trip maintenance, which is you caught the stuff before the ride that was going to be a problem. Like you caught the wheel bearing that had a 1/4 inch of slop or whatever. And I think it's important too. You get home, you got time, go ahead and hose your bike down, get it up on the side stand or work stand, and clean lube your chain so you don't get any rust on it, and just kind of go over it, because riding rocky terrain, stuff like that, will shake bolts loose. That's something you have to be aware of. I remember Nick had a subframe bolt rattle out of his KLR, and that thing was just bouncing up and down like an ironing board, on the back of it, and stuff will rattle out. Check your chain adjusters, stuff like that, if you've got the screw-in type, because those can rattle out too if you're not careful. Yep. And just kind of assessing the damage in some situations, like if you laid your bike down, but in the heat of the moment, you just picked it right back up and kept going, well, inspect it, especially if it's your radiators, because there might be some little, pinhole leak created by a crease you put in it that isn't going to show itself as a problem until you're out in the middle of nowhere.
Yep. Yeah, it definitely pays to do that. You definitely, you don't want to be just putting it away in the garage dirty and then not touching it for a couple of weeks, and then your buddies message you and want to go ride that weekend, and then Thursday you decide to wash it off, only to discover that, oh God, I need linkage bearings, they're gone, and you can't get them in time now to go on that ride. So the faster you can figure out what's wrong or what you broke during your ride, the quicker you're going to be back out on the trail again.
Yep.
And like you said, you handled that perfectly fine and didn't hold up the ride anything, and
made for a cool story, got some video, and
that's one of the unfortunate things. We actually did like a live Tall Boys and Trackmasters on the side of the trail while you were rebuilding that thing, putting it back together, and still looking for sponsorships for the podcast here, so we can upload videos like that and everybody can kind of watch it together. But I'll put it all and cut it all together and put it up on my YouTube channel here, and it'll make for a great video.
Yeah.
But that type of thing happens. And on the other spectrum of that too, not just bike failures, but health failures.
Yep.
People getting hurt.
Injuries. I've been there. Arthur's been there. If you ride for long enough, it's like ask not for whom the bell tolls type deal. It will come for you at some point. Yeah. That's just the unfortunate reality, and it's a risk that's taken. But I mean, for me at least, it's completely outweighed by the amount of joy and adventure I get out of it. But not just like injury, but just meltdowns. And I'm not just talking about somebody pitching a fit or something like that, but like if you see a guy that's clearly dehydrated, especially we start riding in the summer, you got all this hot, heavy gear on, the boots, the helmet, the jacket, etc. You get out on these pipeline right-of-ways or power line right-of-ways or wide open roads with no tree cover. It's pretty easy to get way hot, way fast, and in technical stuff too, because sometimes it feels like there is zero air movement in the woods. And I think it's something important to watch out for. Like when you come up to a stop, just kind of survey, what your buddies are looking like. Just have a quick glance around. If somebody's like slumped over their handlebars and looks like they're on the verge of death, then chances are you should ask them if they're doing okay and offer what you can. I've been there. I remember on your birthday bash, I ended up getting dehydrated and way hot. And you know, it really detracts from the ride and it makes it hard to concentrate.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely planning for breaks and stops and, lunch stops or whatever you want to have there.
Absolutely. Stop somewhere where you can get you a bite to eat and fill your bike up, and be mindful of us that aren't fortunate enough to have 4-gallon tanks.
Yeah. Something that I think that's overlooked, speaking of people getting, you hope it never happens, but it does happen, is people getting injured on the ride. And just a general basic first aid kit is something great to have that I don't think a lot of people think about to put in their packs on their bikes. You mentioned AJ, like one of the first times we ever went riding with him, we're going down 12 Mile and ends up flipping over the handlebars and tearing his knee open, and torn ACL, PCL, what have you. And here you go. You got to kind of scramble. We're in the middle of one of the worst places you could possibly be to try to get somebody out of. And
very remote, very rough terrain. And that was literally the first ride I'd ever went on with.
Yeah. And luckily, my mom was with us who has a background in nursing and was able to get some sticks and some branches and stuff and kind of make a half splint to keep his leg stable and get him out of 12 Mile Road. And thank God the old couple at the end of 12 Mile were retired EMTs and were able to get a hold of some people to come and pick him up and get him to the place in the hospital in Oakland. And, even go along with that, unfortunately, the first year we did our 304 detour ride, Joey Ellis's dad broke his collarbone down at the bottom of Fort Hill in the most god-awful ravine you could ever think of trying to get somebody out of. So things happen. You need to be able to have a halfway decent plan of getting people out of situations like that and getting them to the help that they need.
Yep. Because once you venture out in the woods together, whether you like it or not, in terms of physical or mechanical breakdown, you owe it to that person to do everything you can to get them or their bike back out of there. I mean, that just comes with the territory.
Yep. You don't want to be sorry about your luck. Have fun. We'll see you later.
Yeah.
Don't be that guy.
Not you will.
Another thing, like you. Go ahead.
I said you definitely don't want to be that guy, because one day it will be you.
Yep.
It's going to be the one that needs help.
Yep. So. You kind of mentioned it earlier too. When you're planning out a dual sport ride, is to think about your gas and your food stops, and try to incorporate those as best as you can. Like you said, it kind of depends on what size gas tanks a lot of the guys have on the ride. I was able to not have to stop for gas. I think we did like 168 miles total.
Aren't you special?
But, guys need breaks. And it's nice, even if you don't need gas, to be able to just stop, take your helmet off for a second, catch your breath, grab a snack, grab a thing of water, and just hang out for a minute.
Yep.
And, food stops can kind of go into the destination as well.
Yep.
I'm a huge fan of Smoke on the Water barbecue down in Elkins. And when I figured out that we were halfway close to over there, that's kind of where I wanted to go for lunch and be able to stop in a nice place like that has great food and some beer on tap. Get you a tall boy with your Trackmasters while you're riding.
In my case, pour the tadpoles out of your boots, air out your wet feet, and sit outside if you're going to do that.
Yep.
Definitely.
Yeah, you don't want to do that, down in Muriel's here in Fairmont or something like that. But
I definitely like stopping somewhere and sitting down for lunch, even if it's just like a, little hole in the wall hot dog place, just to be able to sit down and kind of relax and eat for a little bit and then hop back on the bike. It kind of gives you that recharge, that boost. It reinvigorates you. You feel like you can concentrate better and anticipate terrain better after that. And
And, I think we're pretty blessed in our area to have some really awesome restaurants and mom and pop diners and hot dog places that, and even if, it's not the greatest place to stop and get a bite to eat, when you're out there on the trail and you're beat to death, a 4-day-old hot dog and hot dog water.
Like filet mignon.
Yeah, it tastes like a steak. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And, kind of one of the last things to go over, I think, is, lodging? Especially if you're doing a multi-day ride, obviously, but are you moto camping? Are you planning on getting a hotel or a cabin? There's deadlines when it comes to that as well. You obviously want to try to get to somewhere where you can get set up in the daylight and not have to scramble in the dark to try to get your tent set up or your hammock set up.
And that heavily weighs into who's coming with you.
Yep.
What kind of terrain are you riding? If you're going to hit a lot of really gnarly stuff, are you necessarily going to want to set up a tent and your sleep pad and everything at the end of the day? Or do you think that you're going to be better off just getting a room somewhere, hotel, motel, cabin, whatever? For me, at least, if I'm planning on going moto camping, I'll typically do more Forest Service roads and things like that. Get out, cover some ground, more scenic rides, stuff like, national forest. But if I'm hitting more difficult terrain, I really appreciate being able to have a shower and sleep in a bed. And, that's not born out of an inability to rough it. I spent a lot of time throughout the summers camping out of my truck and all that. But, yeah, man, sometimes at the end of the day, you're already just beat down, and it's just nice to not have to crawl into your tent or hammock or whatever setup you got.
Yeah, man. I kind of, obviously plan that into our upcoming ride we're going to go do with down to Tour de Coalfields. That's a lot of miles to cover. We're going to do 2 days and want to get all the harder stuff out of the way first. But, instead of getting a spot at a campground or something where we can all, pitch tents and have to carry more luggage and more gear and stuff on your bike, just went ahead and reserved a cabin for us. And I think it's going to be
a person or something like that.
Yeah,
pretty great.
Yeah. Being able to get a shower, and it has, a little grocery store on site, and we can get some tall boys, we can get some stuff to make on the grill, and it just makes for a all around better experience, I believe.
Yeah, I agree. You touched on not having to pack the gear. That's another thing too, is, it's not really super noticeable packing a lot of gear on your bike. And when I say a lot of gear, I'm not talking about like everything in the kitchen sink and panniers. I'm talking more like, Billy and his son, packing the essentials, sleeping bag, tent, sleep pad, cook set, all that stuff. But even if you get it light, it can still inhibit your ability to ride tight, gnarly terrain. It can shift the balance point of your bike, especially if you get like a lot of weight up high. And, if you one of those guys that decides you're going to try to stuff everything in a backpack, that will wear you out. It'll fatigue your shoulders, everything else, probably faster than you think it's going to. And, it's just something to consider. Is just, it all comes down to personal preference and tailoring, the ride to what works for you.
Yep. It's really funny. Like, so every single one of these topics kind of go hand in hand together, and it's like, one's not really more important than the other one, but they all need to coincide and work together to make a good dual sport ride. I've been on ones that just weren't fun, just bad. And I'm of the camp that if you take a little bit of time to just figure out a few details here and there and get things figured out, it just makes the experience all that much better at the end of the day.
I agree. And that's not ruling out, like, you can find some pretty interesting stuff spontaneously through exploring. But man, when you get out there with somebody that just doesn't know, like, hasn't done any pre-planning, they're just like, we're trying to get here. I don't know how we're going to get there, but we're trying to get here. And you end up doing, terrain you didn't necessarily want. Like, if you're mainly a dirt and, gravel and trail guy, you end up doing a little bit more slab than you wanted to. But again, that is a necessary evil for a lot of sections of the state. You'll end up doing it, but I won't say it feels like a waste, but sometimes it feels like your time could have been better spent riding, stuff that was a little bit closer to what you were wanting.
Yep. And like you said too, sometimes being spontaneous is advantageous. It becomes a good thing. Our ride was a prime example. when we were on the way to Smoke on the Water barbecue, I just kind of typed it in Google Maps and was like, hey, what's the fastest way to get there? And it was taking us down Buchanan Pike. And I think whenever we turned off of the Kingsville Road, it was like 17 miles or something to the restaurant. And we're cruising along on Buchanan Pike, which, it's kind of twisty and turny a little bit, not terrible slab. And this thing pops up and it says, would you like to save 10 minutes and 5 miles? And I was like, okay, sure. So there was like this big dog leg section that you just kind of went out on Buchanan Pike, and this kind of cut straight across that dog leg. And I'm like, all right, it looks like an old county road and it's asphalt and gravel, and it'll cut off that time. Yeah, we can do that. Save having to wring the necks of the bikes going 60 miles an hour down the hardtop. And we turn off on that road, and it turns from asphalt to gravel, and it goes past this house, and then it's basically this old like strip mine site where the road's not there anymore. Like you can barely see where
like a tram road, like a log skip, and it looked like nothing had touched in forever.
I guarantee we're the first people across there in a long time.
So I mean, that was really fun. You had, it was really challenging terrain, especially you're like me and your tires are getting on the balder side because you haven't gotten around to changing them yet. But we had like, a layer of dead leaves, slick mud underneath that, down logs, roots, mud, water, creek bed. It was just great.
Great road.
That's something that you're not going to be able to look at an aerial photo and find that and be able to know what that terrain consists of. And, that is part of the excitement, is the unknown.
Yeah. And that was definitely one of the roads that you hear about on the news that the Swift semi-truck driver ends up getting jackknifed and stuck on.
Yep.
Thanks to Google Maps. But that type of stuff is really nice for us.
Yep.
Yeah, it was definitely a surprise.
It's very beneficial to us because that's exactly what we want.
But
for some of these adventure guys, that would be absolutely terrible. You get out there, with your 50/50 tires on a 600-pound adventure bike, and don't turn around in time. So it all comes back to, you can pre-route, you can do what you can, but you can't anticipate everything, and you ultimately can't trust aerial imagery or maps. Really,
no. It's all part of the experience, and just doing a little bit of this pre-planning and figuring out things definitely makes it a lot better. But things happen. You can change the route spontaneously and find new fun stuff, boring stuff. You have to deal with bike breakdowns, but in the end, it's all a wash, and it makes for great stories.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. And one kind of funny story, real quick. I don't know why this keeps popping up in my head, but it just cracks me up. When you ride with Fred Miller, he's really good about taking his foot and pointing at obstacles in the road or the trail that you might hit, right? And with the recent wind and rainstorms that we had, there was a fair amount of tree debris down all over the road, and you could see where people would cut out trees to get out of the road and blocking the trails. But we're going along, and there's this giant groundhog, like one of the biggest ones I've ever seen, and it's hit by a car, it's dead, it's laying in the road. And Fred sticks his foot down and points at the groundhog and hits the thing right in the head. And I'm right behind him. And this poor thing, all of its legs and limbs are sticking straight up in the air where it's been dead for several days. And the thing's just spinning around and around, just arms open, just around and around. And I'll never forget that. It was funny as hell.
Well, that's your daily dose of spontaneity. Where else do you get to see it?
No. And it's amazing when you get out on a dual sport bike and see sights you've never seen. And like I said, in the last 3 or 4 years that I've been riding, it's definitely been really fun to see our state in a different way.
Yep.
And
amazed at just what's out there.
Yeah. Stuff that's, old decrepit things in the woods and sites that you can get to on a bike that you can't really get to in a vehicle. I've seen more of the state in the last 3 years than I have my entire life, just being out on the dual sport bike.
Yep. I've had more fun in general than pretty much any other hobby that I've ever been involved in, except maybe just regular camping. But Man, a big thing for me is just getting out there with a group of your buddies and just having a fun day. I ride alone, occasionally, but it just does not compare to having a group of like-minded guys, that are of competent riding level and just getting out there and making a day of it.
I'd say that, other than like finding new fun things to ride and experiencing different terrain and me getting that kind of racing itch bug out of my system, being able to go fast through some rough stuff. My favorite part of the rides, and especially if we're doing a multi-day ride, is the end of the day where you can sit around the fire, a couple tall boys with your buddies, a little bit of ball busting going on between what happened during the day and just, hanging out. That's probably the best part of the day for me.
Sometimes you look out and Chad wipes his Touareg out in the middle of a turn. You get a busted balls over that.
Sometimes you end up camping beside the Namir Al-Amor Boy Scouts of America Israelis.
Yeah, that was quite the adventure.
Yeah, it's all part of the story and it's all part of the fun, man.
Absolutely.
Well, I think before we go, we didn't have a whole lot of comments tonight, but we'll kind of go over a few of these here. Our buddy Tyler Vincent, it says that the Kingville Junior area is ran heavily by Jeeps and big trucks. You got to be careful. Yeah, you can obviously tell that because we saw multiple side-by-sides out that day when we were down through there. And it's amazing how many trails just kind of branched off the main route. And I was talking to a few guys that have ran that area down at buddies of mine at work, and they were saying that some of those trails you go off of, you can go clear down to like to Burgoo from there, which would be a heck of a ride.
You definitely can. It's a shame that, they came back and gated up an area called Rich Mountain back towards Elkins. I did a lot of Jeeping there, when I was in college and stuff, still living in Elkins. But, I could have gotten us from pretty much where that, trail that Google Maps suggested spat us out. You can go from there to, I think it's called Pumpkin Town. Mm-hmm. And you can go from there and get on Rich Mountain, and you can actually go up what they call the Artillery Trail, which is several miles of just like loose bowling ball sized rocks. It's pretty fun, but from what I understand, they've come back and gated it up. But yeah.
Cool. All right, we'll go to the next one, which is my mom. She says, Mama Mia's in Canadian Valley is awesome. Where else can you get shrimp Alfredo? Yeah.
I love getting over towards Davis and Thomas. You get, what is it, Sirianni's. Hellbender's is back open.
Yeah, which is awesome.
Go hit the Canaan Loop. You gotta while you're there.
Oh, yeah. What would you say is your best dual sport trip food you've ever eaten at a restaurant anywhere you stop?
Man, for me, I mean, this will be selfish. For me, it was when I was riding alone and camping out on National Forest for a week last summer. I stopped at the little Food Line or whatever in Parsons and got like a nice USDA New York strip with a big fat cap on it, and picked up some fixins, and definitely probably hold the record for the fastest steak and potato that ever went from Parsons to like Bearhaven Campground on Government Road, because the sun was starting to set and I was really going, but that was probably the best meal I'd ever had. Surrounding riding was that steak.
Yeah, I'd say for me, like I said, big fan of Smoke on the Water. I've had really good stuff there. Their brisket sandwich is awesome. I've had some really, really good sandwiches from there. But honestly, I think the best dual sport meal I ever had is probably that little mom and pop diner that's in Pine Grove. Was with Tom King and my dad, and they had a meatloaf platter. And this thing, that meatloaf was that big.
You know how much Tom loves meatloaf.
God, it was good.
Yeah.
Yeah, Tom loves meatloaf.
And yeah, I definitely like stopping getting something to eat. Probably my worst was also involving Parsons was when I went out to ride with your dad and Tom King, and we stopped in the little pizza place and decided to get 2 larges, and they together ate like half of one single large pizza. And I tried to pick up the slack, and then I was going down Government Road, and I had to keep my visor and stuff up for most of the ride, because I really didn't think I was going to keep it down.
Oh man, that's the worst feeling in the world.
It's awful, man. You eat too much, and get back out on the trail and just get sick.
Just yak it right up.
Yep.
All right. Well, I think this was definitely a good episode, and glad to still have ideas to think about things and share with everybody here. And we're always looking for new ideas.
We'll have content.
Yeah. As long as we got content, we'll keep doing this. Hope to have Rob and Lissa next week, maybe on the podcast, and interview them. Definitely want to pick their brains about stuff. I know they couldn't do it this week, and hopefully we can do it next week with them.
Yeah, I definitely like to see it.
Yep. We'll keep thinking about things to talk about. And as always, we appreciate everybody tuning in and commenting. Like we said, we're open to sponsorships. You can be the
or suggestions for episodes, because we're on number 11. So the topics are getting fewer and fewer. They're off the top of our heads. So
I'm really surprised that we've made it this far, honestly, and not ran out of things to talk about.
I think it's just a testament to our ability to go on about nothing for an hour.
Yeah. Yeah, we appreciate everybody that's watched and stuck with us here so far. It's fun. We like to keep doing it, and we'll see you next Tuesday. Have a good night, everybody.
Thanks again, guys.